Right now, we have a chance to discuss the attacks on American diplomats with Mr. Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst for the UK column Current Affairs website. Good to see you again, Mr. Henningsen. Now, these attacks happened in countries where Washington was directly involved in regime change. What does that say about the effect the revolts have had on the U.S.?
Well, this is a very interesting development, and what you can deduce from this is basically, you know, the Washington and America is still living in their own sort of Western bubble, where they believe that they don't have any chain of responsibility for the events that have happened to transform countries like Libya, for instance, Egypt to a lesser degree, but definitely Libya, because there was a military intervention that killed thousands and thousands of civilians. So this event here could easily be more than just an Islamic anti-American protest. It could have something to do with Gaddafi loyalists that are still being rounded up and arrested and extradited, particularly the recent extradition of Abdullah al-Senussi from Mauritania, a deal which the U.S. brokered for Libya.
Right now, are the new governments of Libya and Egypt too ill-prepared to protect diplomatic premises, or were these events just too unpredictable?
Well, you really have to look at this in a mature way. You know, for the U.S. to bomb and basically destroy a country and assassinate its head of state on worldwide television, and then for diplomats to go in, those diplomats have to realize that they're not innocent. They are parties in a major war crime, so they have to be on guard for that. To think that there's going to be normal diplomatic relations in a country like Libya that's totally unstable as a result of NATO intervention is a bit naive by Western pundits and political politicians and so forth in Washington and London. Nobody is innocent anymore. This is the new paradigm of the Western aggression that they have to accept as a reality.
Now, we're seeing a rise in Islamist groups, rising at the dawn of the Arab Spring. Why are the radical elements proving so difficult for these countries to contain?
Well, you know, most of the radical Islamic elements in all of these countries are controlled by the West. A lot of the Al-Qaeda factions are directed, controlled, and now funded openly, in the case of Syria, by Washington and London. So they have control of the radical elements. This is really an excellent divide and rule sort of situation, you know, to use this clash of civilizations, Islam versus Christianity or something like this. It's a great cover for a neo-colonial agenda and a technique of dividing countries into their respective compartments, compartmentalizing them, and then being able to rule over them either through the UN or through NATO or through other sort of transnational bodies.
Right. I mean, America has been spearheading these changes in Egypt as well as in Libya. You know, what do you think Washington is going to do after this?
Well, you know, Washington might look at this, and it is a tragedy. You know, our hearts go out to the council workers and Ambassador Stevens and his family. But look, the U.S. called all the dead Libyans collateral damage when they were working to take over that country and divide it into its corporate Bantustans. But you know, you can look at the death, this recent death, as collateral damage. This is still part of the aggression. So this is what's called the blowback of Washington and London's aggressive foreign policy. Ambassador Stevens and the staff there are collateral damage in the Western's agenda to march forward and to radicalize parts of these countries and to take over the Middle East in order to prepare the eventual confrontation with Iran, with Israel by its side.
You know, I think a lot of people will be asking, why were the American diplomats paying the tragic price when the anger is supposedly directed at a film which has nothing to do with government? Why do you think that is?
Well, like I said, there's more to the meets the eye here. It's not just about the film. This anti-Western or anti-American angst that's coming from these groups. It's not just about what this film was depicted as. This film will come and go. It will wash away like the Danish cartoons. The real issue here, which is not being talked about, is that these people, the real angst is about the Western aggression, the violence, the killing from Afghanistan all the way to Libya, okay, across the whole arc of the Middle East and Central Asia. That is the big issue that people are not talking about. It's not so much about a religious or clash of civilizations. It's an anti-imperialist angst that's really, I believe, fueling this aggression towards America and some of these European leading NATO countries. This is the price that you will continue to pay. But the West will use this crisis as an opportunity to further either balkanize these countries or introduce other military United Nations peacekeeping forces, more possible NATO, small pockets of troops and so forth. They'll use this crisis as an opportunity, as they always have done. So we need to look through the narrative that's mainly a Western narrative here. It's funny that a lot of this news that really dominates our headlines in some of these Muslim countries is not the #1 story, actually, but we really fuel it and make it the #1 story to provide a difference, a clash, a Muslim versus Christian, West versus East. This is the narrative that the Western globalist imperialist elites love to carry on with.
Let me ask you about Ambassador Christopher Stevens. I mean, he was a key figure in arranging ties with Libya's post-revolution interim government. Does his tragic death signal a deep divide between the new leaders and the people of Benghazi?
Well, Libya was well divided before Ambassador Stevens even stepped foot in Libya. That country was divided as a result of the NATO intervention. And you have warlords and militias marauding around, have raided weapon stocks that were formerly held by the Gaddafi government. So it's absolute chaos. Meanwhile, though, what's very interesting is amongst all this chaos on the surface, the oil assets, the state utilities, the water assets, some of the agricultural assets, and some of the trade economic pockets have already been divided up by British companies, American companies, French companies, corporate companies. They've divided the country and sold off and are selling off its assets for pennies on the dollar in order to pay off the IMF's money injection that they've put into Libya as a result of it being blown up by NATO. So this is the game we saw in Iraq, and it's the game we're seeing in Libya, destabilization, but the corporations will still profit from this chaos, which they have done very efficiently. And that's also not really being talked about in the mainstream media.
Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst for the UK column Current Affairs website. Wish we had more time with you. Thank you for your time.
Patrick, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Mike.
Okay, your volume is pretty low, Patrick. Can you hold your mic?
Sure. Is that any better?
That's better, much better. Okay, so we've just been watching your RT. That was yesterday you did that with RT?
Yes, correct.
How have things moved on since then?
Well, that situation we talked about in Libya, this has immediately been sprung into a political sort of back and forth dualist spin between Democrats and Republicans in America, namely the gaffe by Republican nominee Mitt Romney, which he's been absolutely lambasted in the press. But again, that's a dog and pony show, which is the U.S. national election, which will continue to be entertaining for the next month and a half. But the reality on the ground is, I believe that the uprising in Libya was something that is not so much to do with Islam versus Christianity or East versus West, but it has everything to do with a definite anti-imperial, anti-European, anti-NATO sentiment as Libyans begin to wake up to the actual devastation that's been created, because the quality of life in Libya has really gone downhill since the Gaddafi regime has fallen, and stability is nowhere to be found.
And I mean, I saw a rumor today. I don't know whether this is true, so it's unconfirmed from my point of view. That's actually unreported in the mainstream media that I saw was an atrocity against the Syrian military. Actually, this time, where large numbers of Syrian military have been killed.
Yeah.
Do you know? Have you got any background to that?
Well, it's the initial reports I saw, in the mainline media and also on Russia Today, did report on that a little bit. But what's really interesting is to see how the Western spin has been applied to that event. Obviously, they're not the UN and all these international bodies that are crying human rights violations and decrying violence and everything. They're not. They're only doing it on one side of that coin. So obviously, it's not an even field. Now, it's very difficult to verify and to know exactly what's going on in Syria because it's incredibly complex. It's like a false flag Disney World right now in Syria. There's so many proxy factions. There's covert operations going on there. Countless amount of covert operations, black ops going on there. The British are definitely involved. As the British had boots on the ground in Benghazi much earlier than the mainstream media reported, there are advisors. CIA is very active in many parts of Syria right now. So there's a lot of kerfuffle and dodgy things going on there right now. It's really difficult to disseminate, and also the mainstream media have not really even penetrated Syria at all. There's a few affiliates and a few reports coming in, but there's not a lot of purpose journalism going on the ground in Syria right now. So it's incredibly difficult to see the woods from the trees.
And what's your take on this whole this new video that's come out that's pushing that's basically going out of its way to insult Islam the way that the cartoons of Muhammad did a couple of years ago? Are you saying this? Because I look at this and I think that it's a major escalation in the Clash of Civilizations policy.
Yeah, I think, what? Look at the pastor behind this this particular film is a questionable character, and he's representing the extreme reactionary right, the Christian right in the United States. So anybody who's on any of the radical spectrums, especially in America, whether it's the new Black Panthers or the new Christian right or this anti-Islamic pastor, I forgot his name, in America, who did this recent film which insulted the Prophet Muhammad, any of these radical elements, it's almost a 99.9% bet that they are being directed by the FBI or the CIA in order to create a reaction. That's why this film will come and go. This is only like a bit of gasoline to throw in the East versus West Clash of Civilizations narrative, but it will come and go. And it's done to distract. It's a major distraction. It's to further divide and rule, and really, you can see the West agenda really coming into clear view now. It's not about oil as much. Of course, the economic opportunities are there, but it's to keep this whole arc of conflict going. They need to create to divide and rule. So they need to get rid of the nation states. They need to get rid of Libya, Syria, any of these remaining nation states. So all you're left with is theocracies and religious states like Saudi Arabia and Israel are both religious states. The Gulf Emirates or petro monarchies, and then to have all these little pockets of dissent being popped up now and again, and to give an excuse for international intervention and so forth. So it's really a brilliant strategy, and it's been used time and time again over hundreds of years throughout Africa, throughout Southeast Asia, everywhere. So they're really just recycling this neo-colonial technique that they've perfected over the last 50, 60 years, and they're just reapplying it with the 2002, 2012 kind of style to it right now to suit this post 9/11 anti-Islamic or they hate us for our freedom sort of narrative.
And I saw that Netanyahu came out yesterday and is again continuing to ramp up the anti-Iranian rhetoric, and he's basically saying that he's accusing people of being ill in some way if they don't accept Israel's plans for attacking Iran. I mean, how do you see that side of this Middle Eastern axis going at the moment? Well,
the Netanyahu sort of rhetoric is really it's like when Britain and America are seen to be at odds politically. This happened a few times during the Blair administration, and it's really a dog and pony show. What's going on now in America is the focus polls, the opinion polls before the election. The majority of Americans are not interested in attacking Iran or getting into another conflict. So the political rhetoric in Washington, they're backing away from that in the run-up to the election, and so then Israel's trying to play that, reverse spin on that to seem like, to put pressure on the parties there. And of course, there are elements of the Israeli lobby that are really trying to go for this war in Iran. Obviously, Romney's a bit more on the Israeli side at the moment. But when Obama or Romney or whoever wins in November, they're going to go straight back into the old agenda, and I'll bet the house on it. So then it'll be all about Iran again and the nuclear, or they'll find some other biological or some sort of thing, or some thing to move closer to Iran. But at the end of the day, Mike, they can't touch Iran until they destabilize Lebanon, because any attack preemptively with Israel involved on Iran will mean a retaliation by Hezbollah. And Israelis will not put up with that. They're scared to death after 2006. A hail of Katyusha rockets coming down for a month in the 2006 conflict. So the dominoes have to fall in that order. Syria hasn't fallen yet. That has to fall first, then Lebanon must fall, and then Iran is then open to be surrounded, and to be aggressed upon.
Would we see if the attack was to go to Lebanon first, would we then see Iran coming in? Would they come in to defend Hezbollah, or do you think they would stand by the sidelines and see how it would play out?
They have to stand by the sidelines. There's no way. I mean, Iran can aid Hezbollah in a proxy fashion. They can smuggle arms in. They can give logistical support, but they're not going to fire any missiles if Hezbollah is attacked. Iran will fire missiles if Iran is attacked. But the longer this drags out, it's not looking good for Israel and the U.S. because there's major Shiite populations in countries like Bahrain that are already starting to boil, and also Iraq. Don't forget, Iraq. There's a major Shiite population, and Iran will tacitly support all of these little Shiite pockets in Lebanon, in Bahrain, in part of the Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, okay? And they've got their hand, Israel and the U.S. have their hands full because they're trying to, govern countries like Iraq and Syria and basically the whole Middle East in this kind of proxy way and through this kind of quasi-neo-colonial fashion. They're not going to be able to deal with that sort of dissent, and it's going to be it can get very ugly regionally. But I see this as a longer, protracted situation. The media is really reacting and always jumping on it. Remember December last year, everyone was all, war with Iran within weeks. Everyone was screaming about it, writing about it. News anchors are totally on that talking point. But people need to calm down and look at the geopolitical spectrum. There's a chessboard here, and certain pieces need to be securely in place before any major moves are made from the back. From this, major moves are made from the back. So it's still pawns and bishops and rooks right now.
So a couple of weeks ago, we reported on on a mainstream story that was suggesting that Iran had been sending Republican guards into Syria. Are you saying that?
No, I saw that same story, Mike, about 8 months ago. That came out of Al Arabiya, which is a Saudi propaganda outlet. Right. So there's a lot of these files, and Depka files, another one. This is in Israeli British intelligence front website that masquerades as an intelligence clearinghouse, but it's nothing of the sort. It's started by the people who used to run The Economist in the Middle East. So you can kind of tell who's behind that. But Press TV does a lot of good work, but Press TV has also got a lot to answer for journalistically. They'll just run with any sort of rumor half the time, so it's really hard to see what's what. So we need to sit back and work hard to triangulate reports to get to try to find some veracity to some of these reports. I don't see Iran deploying troops outside of Iran. This is a very large, very strong country, and they have to shore up their defenses, and they've always done that. Their policy has never been outward-looking. Iran's policy has always been inward-looking. So it doesn't follow their behavioral pattern. They couldn't send arms, they can send logistical support, they can give satellite support, they can give propaganda support with Press TV, which the BBC does for Britain, and everyone has their own propaganda outlet to try to sway public opinion or get people to be more compassionate. But as far as sending elite Republican guards, I think they're more likely to keep them at home training and doing drills and preparing for a potential strike in 2013 or 14 by Israel and the United States.
Okay, so what about Assad then? Does he have a hope of winning?
I think the writing's on the wall. The Assad regime is on the way out, but how are they going to exit? This is the $64,000 question. How are they going to fold this regime into a new government? Is it going to be done with an eventual military strike from outside to speed up the process, or is it going to slowly burn from inside, like Afghanistan did in the 80s with the Mujahideen uprising, pushing the Soviet Union out, that style of a protracted sort of 4 to 6 year conflict. So it remains to be seen, but definitely the majority of Syrians are probably supporting the government because they're looking to Assad for security and stability. But that's being undermined by the international NATO countries that are funding the rebellion and funding Al-Qaeda and promoting suicide bombings and general chaos and death and violence. So it's really difficult situation in Syria. But yes, Assad, his main enclave, Alawite enclave, is in the northwest. So this is by the Turkish border, northwest Syria on the Mediterranean border. So if Syria is balkanized later through conflict, that's where the Alawites will be. And then the Kurds will be in the northeast. And then the Druze will be by the Golan Heights in the south. And then the Sunnis will run through Damascus and through the middle of the country. So, and then you have a Shiite pockets of Shiite population. And you have Christians spread all over Syria, especially in the central part, in areas like Homs and so forth. They're being ethnically cleansed by the Free Syrian Army, or the so-called Free Syrian Army. And you see this ethnic cleansing, religious cleansing of Christians going on, and intimidation in countries like Egypt as well. This is a Western-backed program to increase that narrative of the clash of civilizations. It doesn't make sense to the average Guardian reader, but in the world of the intelligence agencies and the plans, the divide and rule scenarios, this makes perfect sense. And I think we'll see that more and more as time goes by.
So if Assad's on his way out, is he going to survive this personally? And the other question is, what is going to replace him? Is it going to be Western-backed, Al-Qaeda-controlled so-called opposition, or is there somebody else to take his place?
That's a hard question to answer, and a lot of people would like to know the answer to that one. I would like to see a graceful exit and a smooth transition into maybe a Lebanese-style parliament, proportional representation based on religion. It's not perfect, but it's worked in Lebanon for a while now. Very successful model. But again, if Lebanon goes by the wayside, this conflict in Syria spills over, then you have a double problem. Because then you have, those are the two last secular states. I mean, Turkey, you can argue, is a secular state. but Turkey is a different dimension than what's south of its border. So Syria, the real goal here, Mike and Malcolm, is to eliminate the nation state. This is to eliminate anybody that will identify themselves with a secular nation state. And they prefer to have people in the future, I'm talking from a Western point of view, is to identify with a religious group. That is the preference, because then it's much easier to divide a compartmentalized society that's constantly at conflict with itself. Because it's a Hegelian dialectic. Yeah. You create the problem, and then you ride in on the white horse with the solution. Over and over, we've seen this pattern. And frankly, the world should be getting tired of it by now, but they're still going to push on because they're doing what they know best. But Assad, I'm not sure. Switzerland, the United Kingdom, I don't know where he would end up, but Russia, who knows. But I would hate to see a Gaddafi-style mob execution that we saw, which was very ugly. To see that happen. This is a guy that was educated in the United States, or the United Kingdom, went to Oxford, I believe. His wife, good family. You might not agree with the Ba'athist single-party rule, but hey, it's worked for Syria. No government system is perfect. Not a constitutional monarchy, not an American-style democracy. Nothing's perfect, but it has allowed for stability in that country and low inflation, state-owned bank, state-owned industries, purchasing power. The average salary has been able to maintain its purchasing power for 20 years. $200 a month, good salary in Syria, good standard of living. Okay, better than £2,000 a month in Britain. Okay, right. That's the difference you'll see if that government falls and the West is allowed to economically colonize and reissue a new private central bank in Syria, like they've done in Libya. Take away all the public services, take away any protection from minorities. Assad's government has protected the Jewish enclave in Damascus for 4 years. So that's going to go. If his regime falls, it's going to become a compartmentalized, one-dimensional, region. Who knows?
Well, I think the same really can be said for all the nations that have felt the force of NATO and other kind of people with their own agendas. We've seen the same in Iraq, we've seen it in Afghanistan, Libya, now we're seeing it in Syria, where countries that, like you say, we may disagree with their policies and we may disagree with the way that they were running their country, but at least the country was to some extent running, and the people had facilities and they had hospitals and things that could look after them. But of course, once the invading forces have left, what's left behind is just a complete mess, which is, of course, then left to be tidied up by the financial cartels and various other institutions.
Yeah, in Damascus, to fill a tank of propane before all this stuff kicked off, it cost you around $10 or something, and now it's $100. Okay, yeah. To get petrol, to get gasoline in your car, everything's just quadrupled because it's all supply and demand. They've created scarcity for food, for fuel, for basic supplies. Of course, there's a flourishing black market as a result. But that's the kind of economic chaos that you're seeing. And sort of, and again, if it is destabilized and half the utilities are bombed or destroyed, then the IMF comes in with a huge cash injection to rebuild the country. And then they're stuck on the debt conveyor belt for the next 30 or 40 years. And inflation goes up, and there's no good side to it, really. Not if you're Syrian. There's good side to some people that will see it as an opportunity to solidify and monopolize certain sectors of the economy in that country and politically. But for everyone else, it's no good. There's already lots of people leaving Syria right now, very loyal to the government, now living in the UK. They've gone to France, Denmark, Germany. I know some people personally that I thought would never leave that country. They'd be there to the death. And they're gone right now. So that was an indication to me that things are incredibly shaky right now. It will get worse. It's going to be a long, painful one, guys. I don't see it happening immediately.
Well, what about Russia then? Because obviously Russia is supporting Assad in the United Nations, as is China, but Russia in particular. Russia is going to have particular difficulties with what's going on in the Middle East in general, because obviously that region is on its southern borders. Russia's pretty unhappy with the missile defences that have been placed in Europe, in Eastern European countries. Where is it going to stand as things deteriorate further in the Middle East? Because obviously the danger is that Russia is going to get involved in some way itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a really interesting point, Mike. Okay, this is the behind-the-scenes game going on with Russia. Why is Russia so interested in having Syria stay as an independent secular nation state? It's not just because they have a port at Tartus. There's a bigger reason than this. The plans are from Qatar, a Qatari-funded and joint venture with the U.S. and some other major corporation to build a gas pipeline from Qatar to around Tartus to the Mediterranean, and this would bypass and allow for to bypass the Gazprom Russian monopoly for natural gas to Europe. Okay, this is major because, as we know, on a geopolitical scale globally, oil is still the #1 mover and shaker of a commodity. But on a regional scale, gas is #1. And Russia demonstrated that last year with the Ukraine, is able to exert incredible political influence over that country, especially during the winter, because it didn't pay its gas bill. So Russia is very interested for its own personal economic interests to maintain that more or less monopoly, being Europe's #1 natural gas provider. Of course, this would throw a spanner in the works if Qatar was able to get their pipeline through Syria. And this would also bring the Emirates into Syria. The Prince of Qatar has openly said that he wants his son to be the Emir of Syria. Okay? So that's on record. So they have, the Qataris especially have an interest there. That's why they're, funding the rebels, giving, Al Jazeera was giving sat phones to Syrian rebels, and they're funding Al-Qaeda and God knows what else. So that's the future, and that's why Russia's interested. It's not just a hangover from the Cold War. They have economic interests that are very real and very present.
Okay, so you say that what's going on in Syria is going to be a long and protracted thing. What kind of timescales are we looking at? And do you see this as being you obviously see this as spilling over into Lebanon. Do you see that as being quite an organic process, or is it going to be, well, we've done Syria now, and now we're attacking Lebanon, or how's that going to be presented by the Western politicians?
Well, there's natural spillover because the border between Lebanon and Syria is just that. It's just a border. You have the same tribes, same families, religious groups spilling over that border. That's an artificial border as well. That's from the French, leftover from the French mandate in Syria. But there is organic spillover, and also it can be an engineered event as well. I think if they're not having much success with regime change in Syria, they could easily up the ante by going in hard and heavy in Lebanon. And it's very easy. Lebanon's like a powder keg that only needs a very small spark to get it going. And that's very unfortunate if that happens, because it's a beautiful country, beautiful society, beautiful people. But it does have a history, and they've worked really hard, the West, with their various media outlets and through the talking points, to demonize Syria and blame them for the assassination of Rafiq Hariri in 2005, for instance, with no evidence to back that claim. But that all has seeped in as a meme in Lebanese society, so there's this natural dislike of Syria over the recent years, even though Syria provides Lebanon with 25% of its baseload of electricity for almost no money, because Lebanon can't produce its own electricity. All these little things. Syria has acted like Big Brother for Lebanon for many years, okay? But they end up getting blamed for it. And all Syria was doing that in its own interest, naturally, because of Israel and its situation with Israel and their history. That goes right back to Nasser, Abu Nasser days. Syria and Egypt were one country for a period of time during the 60s, part of the 70s. Syria, Egypt. So you look at the history here and you can kind of work out how this chess game is going to go. But I see this as a protracted conflict. Assad's a tough character. The Syrian army are not buffoons. It's not like the Iraqi Republican Guard, whose average age was 35, mostly overweight and totally corrupt. You could buy him out for, £1,000 a head. Syria is not that situation. They're tough. They're going to hang in there. They're well trained. They're committed, but they can only take so much, and the country will eventually implode from within. This could take up to a year and a half, as far as I can see.
Okay, well, if we can just talk about, well, two other key events that have happened in the last week or so that I wanted to talk to you about. One was William Hague's visit to Egypt. See if you had anything to say about that, and also the question in my mind is, does Hillary Clinton really care about the assassination of her ambassador in Libya?
Well, of course, we'll start with Hillary Clinton, get her out of the way. I'm sure she cares, but they will not let that crisis go to waste. They'll find some way to use that as leverage. Americans, based on their reaction to this, they've been caught on their back heels. And Hillary Clinton and friends of Syria and all the other, usual suspects, they've been caught on their back heels. I think they really, there is a naivety and a detachment from reality in Washington that exists, where they thought that they could reform Libya in the image of whatever they were thinking, but that was new territory. I do think there's a certain amount of chaos in Libya that was unexpected. With regards to William Hague, I can't think of anything good to say about William Hague, based on all his anti-Syrian, anti-Gaddafi rhetoric, and he's the #1 cheerleader. He's the front row guy in the Foreign Office and as a Foreign Secretary, so he's totally on message all the time. There's no compassion there. There's no interest in diplomatic. He's supposed to be a diplomat. The Foreign Secretary of this country is supposed to be a top diplomat. You look at the difference between William Hague and then you look at Lavrov from Russia. Look at the difference between these two guys. Look at their demeanor. Look at their speech. Look at how they handle themselves. It's absolutely night and day. One of them's a statesman. The other one's just a sort of a coffee boy. I can't believe William Hague. It's just the agenda is so open and obvious right now, and of course, if it wasn't the conservatives, Mike, this would be you'd have a labor gang in there doing exactly the same thing. And that's what people really need to look at in this country, is that it doesn't matter who the names are, who changes titles and who's shuffled. The agenda moves forward, and the agenda has never changed. And that's becoming so obvious right now. And I think people need to take a good hard look at it. To take off their labor hat, take off their conservative hat, and look at the agenda. And is the agenda good for this country? Is it in Britain's interests? I know Brian Garish has said in past conversation, of course it's not. And I think we can all agree that this is not in our best interest, because what this is doing is it's pushing us closer and closer towards another war, another multi-regional, possibly a thermonuclear conflict or something like that, where we might have a radiation cloud, over our heads after 2 weeks. That's what they're pushing towards. They think that they're shoring up the new world order and redrawing maps and so forth. They're not. They're pushing towards a very dangerous confrontation. And you have some serious players on both sides. And there's going to be a lot of collateral damage if they're allowed to have their wicked way.
And what would you think would be the ultimate goal? The reasons why they would be driving for such a conflict?
The reason is because with every major conflict, you have a solution ready in the box. And after the Second World War, the League of Nations was rubbished, rightfully so. Or you can go back to the First World War. The League of Nations was created as a failure. Second World War, the United Nations was created. But the agenda has advanced incrementally over this 100 years. So the next big multi-country war, multi-regional war, they're going to blame the UN, not being strong enough, not being this, not being that. They're going to replace it with a new body, which is going to have more power, which is going to go deeper into society. It's going to have a global police where there's no Security Council vote. They just get deployed. NATO is a good example of what that might look like. And they'll have a global currency, possibly. So it's a conflict, create the problem, blame it on your predecessors, but the agenda moves forward to the next level. So that's how I see this, and when I'm trying to make sense of it, that's the only thing I can see. And they need to get rid of and smash the nation state. They've done that in Europe. They're going to, as it's pointed out on UK column, draw different regions in Europe, diminish the nationalism, the languages, the cultures, the feeling of nationalism. I believe in unity through diversity. I believe it's better to have people to have their own identities and then come together where they need to come together. But the New World Order, the One World Order, is about getting rid of that nation state. Syria was the last one in the Middle East, which was a secular nation state. Turkey is very close, but Syria was definitely a totally secular nation state. No religion and government at all. And that's gone. So it plays into the hands of the longer narrative to create a polarized world with clash of civilizations.
Okay, well, we've only got a couple of minutes left, Patrick. So, have you got any closing thoughts on this?
On what, Mike?
Have you got any closing thoughts on? I mean, for example, what might we do about this at this point?
Well, I think you know what? I had a really good conversation with a writer, Israeli artist and a writer. His name is Gilad Atzmon. Okay, brilliant guy. He's a guest on my show next week.
Right.
One of the best interviews I've ever had. I've ever sat down and done. And I asked him about Palestine. I said, "What about Palestine? What are your feelings on that?" And he's like, "You know what? I've been back and forth on Palestine." And he's like, "Now I've realized that how can we have solidarity for Palestine or someone like this, anybody in the world oppressed, when we don't see our neighbors being evicted, see people being arrested in secret courts and so forth, the police state in our own country. Where are we when our neighbors are having the boot on the back of their neck? Where are we? Palestine is here." Gilad said, "Palestine is here." And we're standing in the middle of London. So he said, this is, we need to think in this fashion. How can we help somebody halfway across the world when our prophets are being killed and our important people are being thrown in jail, our rights are being lost, our money is being stolen from us? We are Palestine here, and we're much better suited to help out other people if we're able to take care of our own affairs at home. You know, and I really believe, I'm seeing that more and more, I'm believing that more and more. Our solution starts locally and fans out from there. And I believe it's important for Britain to have its own identity and not to be folded into Europe. And for France, ditto for France, ditto for the Spanish, ditto for the Portuguese, ditto for the Greeks. You know, it's a much stronger Europe, I think, if people are able to retain their identity, trade with each other, have exchanges, cultural exchanges with each other. But that's not the agenda coming out of Brussels. coming out of the UN. It's to homogenize the region, okay? That's their future. That's their utopian dream. For us, it's a dystopian dream, okay? They think it's beautiful. I don't agree. I don't think it's beautiful at all.
Yeah.
I think it's like the Hunger Games.
Yes, indeed. Okay. Well, look. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for your time. We'll end there, Patrick, and we'll have you on again soon.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, it's 4 o'clock. We come to the end of the show.
Another end of another show. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very
we'll be
much.
back tomorrow at midday. And goodbye from us.
Goodbye.